Excellent. So you may have a thing pop up on your screen saying, are you happy to be recorded? That would be great if you can be happy. David McIntosh coming in. Well, welcome everybody. We're just after time, but we'll give another couple of minutes before we get cracking. We might just have a quick talk around to see where everybody's coming in from at the moment as well. So I know we've got people from different parts of the world. So Christine, are you there?
I'm here.
Where are you coming in from?
Coming in from south of England, Dorchester.
Beautiful. It's a wonderful thing. Rowan?
Hey, my mum.
Rowan, where are you?
The one and only Danny.
The one.
I am coming live from my study in Hawthorne Dean, South Australia, Troy.
Brilliant. Berman?
From, Adelaide, Clearview, South Australia. Yep.
Excellent. Yvonne, welcome.
Hi, I'm coming to you from South Australia in Adelaide.
Excellent. Welcome, Yvonne. Ian?
From Sydney in Australia.
Brilliant. Welcome, Ian. Richard?
Broadcasting to you live from my bedroom in Adelaide, South Australia.
Sensational. Mr. David Watts?
Broadcasting live from my family room in Hectorville, Adelaide, South Australia.
Excellent. Mr. Glenn Winkler, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Troy, in my living room in Adelaide, South Australia.
Sensational. And Mr. David McIntosh, welcome.
Hi, and I'm in London, in England.
Fantastic. Beautiful.
Nice to see you, geezer.
I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, I got you. You know me. I don't mess around, brother.
Welcome. Well, look, welcome everybody. And my name's Troy Flower. I'm in Adelaide, South Australia as well. I run a company called Wellteam, and Wellteam is out to try and deliver value for people to help them live their best lives. And both Jordan and Danny are very much a part of our growing community with Wellteam. Now, I will also call out Booman. Booman's also part of the Wellteam crew, and there's quite a lot of Wellteam members on the Zoom call here tonight. It's fantastic to have you all here, and particularly to be exploring a conversation that is often a difficult one to have, and often one where getting real information is quite hard. There's often a lot of information that you can read in brochures, and there's a lot of sort of very clinical conversations held around drugs. And I can think of no better people to really help us dive deep into this subject than both Jordan and Danny. And so I'm going to give them an opportunity for a brief introduction to themselves, less than a minute, so we can dive right into the content. But just to say that in our personal experience, we've had some issues around the drug space and diving into that space. And I will potentially share some of that as well. And anybody else, if they do wish to contribute, can. And I would ask you to keep any information that's shared of a personal nature confidential on this call. Now, we will be, and we are recording this as well, so we will make it publicly available. So I just want you to remember that. And also, if there's anything that's spoken about today that's particularly triggering for you, if you have any issues that arise from that, please feel free to drop out of the call. You can drop back in again. You also have the option to turn your screen off and to turn your audio off as well, if there is anything of that type of nature. The toilets are to your left or to your right, depending on your particular facility, and the emergency exits could in fact be anywhere. So let's just dive straight into it. Danny, tell us in 30 seconds or less. I'll say 30 because you'll probably go for 1 minute. Just give us your brief background and why you're sitting on this side of the screen.
So I've pretty much lived what I work now for about 20 odd years before I got it right. So I've been pretty much studying it my whole life. And then the last 10 years I've done it professionally, worked in the clinical industry in the Northern Territory alongside Jordan. And we moved down here and opened our own business because we didn't want to be stuck with clinical red tape. And we believe what we do and how we do it can be done the way we want to do it and not put inside a box clinically. And that's kind of how we started this business. And we're very passionate about helping people, young and old, men, women, children, whoever they are, with addiction, because it's not a choice. It's a response to pain.
Yeah, brilliant. And Jordan, Lock Dog.
Yeah, I'm similar but different. So I was first off raised in a home of substance abuse, then found myself working in that sector of drug and alcohol. Been in the industry for about 8 years now and currently working in our business as a peer-to-peer driven business, holistic practices and whatnot. And also sometimes I'm working in the peer space with the primary healthcare network.
Yeah, brilliant. And you know what I find really difficult about this space is that as a parent, so I have 2 teenage kids. You see the booklet on drugs, and the government sends out this wonderful booklet on how to talk about drugs and this wonderful space, but nothing ever happens in isolation. It's always a sort of a complex environment when you start to experience a conversation around drugs, or you notice that your kids or a loved one is using drugs. Why is it that we don't talk about drugs in a more open sense than typically what happens?
Well, look, I think that we've got a lot of things backwards. I find it fascinating and frightening at the same time that everyone can now freely talk about mental health, and openly it's acceptable and accepted, which it should be. And yet we can't talk about someone with their addiction in a workplace, in a family setting, in a friendship setting, in a social setting, or in a community setting, when it's the same thing. Mental health and addiction go hand in hand like bread does to butter. Sorry, Mum, butter. So I don't really understand how it's set up like this, but it is. And the stigma and attachment theory around addiction is what is perpetuating the problem to continue, along with, to be quite honest, some extremely old age draconian practices that have some value, but refuse to let new value in from new practices that should go clinical and holistic, put together as one, with mind and body as the connection.
Yeah, and so if you're in a family environment, so for us at 16 years of age, we had drugs enter our house to start the conversation, and I'm just going to dive straight in. I had a conversation with you at the time, Danny, and that was really helpful for me. But as a parent, I go straight to the fear, straight to the, my goodness, what's going to happen to somebody that I love, and what do I do about that? And I catastrophize the future, and my reaction is one of almost complete panic. How should somebody approach the situation if they hear a loved one, or they see a loved one, or there's evidence, or they suspect that somebody that they love might be starting on this pathway of drugs? What should we be doing? What's big question, but where should we go?
I think it's going to be a bit different for a loved one versus someone as close to you as, say, a teenage child. I think a lot of what goes wrong is we don't change our communication with our teenagers. We remain the authoritarian and the disciplinary. and we try to keep our parenting consistent, which is great, but you've got someone in their teen years, especially between 12 and 18, they're trying to establish their identity, establish their independence, they're going to rebel, and they're probably after more of a partnership than a parent at that point. You know, you start to lose your role as the leader because they're trying to find their role as a leader.
Yeah, okay. And so how do you broach that conversation?
You want to get into partnership, and instead of, like, you know, using a line of questioning which elicits shame or you end up coddling them, you want to use language like, you know, I'm here for you, how can I help?
Okay.
You know, it becomes a partnership, not a I'm going to talk down to you because I'm the parent.
And so at what point in that process, so there's experimentation with drugs, and then it moves on to something greater. It moves on to addiction. What's that process? How does that happen? Because I imagine many of us have experimented with drugs. I certainly did when I was in my 20s and not younger. But a lot of people do it many different times in their life. How does it transition from being experimentation to being something that becomes all-consuming or an addiction?
It can definitely be circumstantial. Again, if we're talking about teenagers and adults, you know, it's a bit different. Again, you know, teenagers are trying to establish themselves, and there might be a lot of peer influence. You know, they spend more time away from you than they do with you. You know, they're at school and with friends 90% of the time, and you get a small portion of time with them. So influence is heavy. But, you know, even with adults, you know, like there's a lot of people that drink and they go to work and they're very functional, but, you know, it could be a moment of distress and turmoil, and that becomes a great crutch, a relief from whatever's going on. And, you know, when something can relieve pain that is quite deep and overwhelming, it can be very sticky.
And how do you then, what do you do to change that? You know, the hard part for us was seeing the type of people that swarm around that person when they're in that state, and almost lock them into that behavior because it's comfortable, and you can see that that's a place where they feel like they belong. And it feels very difficult as an adult to break into that space, because as an adult, you kind of almost seen, I guess, as the authoritarian, or maybe that was just our behavior in that space. How do you help break into that? Do you break into that circle, or what's the best way to try and help them out?
Are we just talking about people in general, not the teenagers?
Well, maybe teenagers, but people in general, I think.
First. You can do the teenagers, I'll talk about the grown-ups.
I guess, you know, there's quite a lot that goes into it, because, you know, teens are complex. Anyone that has a teenager will say, like, I don't know what I'm doing from one day to the next. I would always say, start with yourself, be a role model, change your communication, be congruent with what you're trying to, you know, preach, like always be practicing. But have that dialogue, that communication where they know that they can come to you and open up, and they're not going to be met with a line of questioning that makes them feel shame. Or, you know, like I said before, you might end up coddling them. Like, you know, if you just do this, I'll give you everything. You know, you want to create a space where they can open up and go, look, mum or dad, things aren't great. And instead of going, you know, why don't you do this? You should be doing that. You know, I didn't raise you this way. Why can't you be like your sister or brother? It's like, all right, I'm here for you. How can I support you? What can we do together?
And also to add on to that, I think when parents find out their teenagers, or a lot of parents can find out when their teenagers may have been using drugs or whatever, they start at this free fall. A lot of parents like, oh, what does that say about us? Like, oh, where did we go wrong? And all these statements. And it's like, it's got nothing to do with you. Just stop it. Pull the ego aside. Stop making it about you and what have we done wrong as parents, and realize that this is somebody asking for help or support, and stop making it about you. Just remove you from the equation and what this means about you as parents, and screw the Joneses and whoever else is involved in where you're being driven from feeling that way, and just sit in the mud with your teenager and say nothing. Just sit there. Like, I'll give you a very quick example. When I was 16, I'd already been experimenting, drinking, whatever. Well, Mum's just left, so I can tell the story even easier now.
I think she's back on now.
It doesn't matter because this is about her. She knows this story well. But anyway, the point being is, so I used to, Guernsey's a drinking place anyway. We used to drink from quite a young age. But the point being is, I got caught with marijuana by the police, got arrested, and there was a whole rigmarole. And I thought, because my mum was so laid back, and I don't mean laid back as in she let us drink all the time, but she would sit with my mates and me and say, right, if you're going to drink tonight, I'm going to buy you a case of beer for the 5 of you and you're going to drink here, because then at least I know where you are, because you're going to do it anyway. So I thought when I got caught for cannabis that first time, Mum would be the pushover. Like, I could go back and be like, oh, look, I messed up. I don't know, it's all right. But actually, the opposite was true. And she basically barely spoke to me for a week. And afterwards sat me down and said, I don't care whether you kill someone, whether you're in a gang, whether you do all of these horrible things. But if you don't tell me what you've done or what you're into, I can't help you. So don't you ever lie to me again, even if it's using drugs. Just tell me what you're doing so I know what I need to do to support you. And I think that is a very powerful way of including your young child or teenager in the conversation so that they can explore what they're doing wrong or right. Now, I'm not saying that that's an easy way of parenting or being able to free fall and jump into that would be easy. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just going off what my mum's parenting style was when she first found out about that. And it's always made me feel like I can go to her with anything since, and it's helped a lot. But yet again, that doesn't mean it's easy for anyone to try and encapsulate and do that as a parent.
Yeah. And so if, and again, I'm fairly naive when it comes to drugs. Are there different drugs that we should have a different response to? So if we find out somebody's using a particular type of drug, is that you're going to need professional help, or is there a space where it's the same approach?
Well, I definitely think if your teenager and loved one is using any substance and you've got no idea or information around anything, you should always get professional, information, seek that professional support. Even if it is alcohol, you don't know how dangerously they might end up drinking. If they're doing heroin, like if you just don't know, you need to ask.
Yeah. And how do you find, again, the difficulty, I guess, as a parent is that, and certainly from our environment, perhaps we've created a set of standards where it's hard for our kids to tell us, because we would be upset if we heard that they were using something. And so how do you help if you've already created that environment? How do you help a child if they don't trust you enough to tell you what they're using and you haven't created that?
If they haven't told you, but I don't think there's any harm in coming out and just asking the question. Are you using drugs?
Yeah.
It'd be the same if you thought your kid was having suicidal ideation. You want to know, are you thinking about suicide? Because if you don't know, you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And also a very powerful technique we used to use, or I used to train some of the staff with back in Alice Springs, not my staff because they've all got lived experience, but some that didn't. So if you don't know about the drugs that they may be taking or whatever, I mean, kids are into all manners of different things that, like, even I know about, but like lean, which is where they mix like Benylin with alcohol, and there's all this other stuff. But if you don't know, but you know they're using, like I used to tell the staff, don't sit there and pretend like you know. Sit there and say to them, so tell me, like, what are you using and what does that do to you? Like, explain it to me, what you're going, and let them teach you what they're experiencing as you learn what you need to learn outside of that. Like, it makes it, Jordan can explain the theory more, but Jordan came up with a very powerful program, which we will get off the ground once upon a time in the future, with a certain gentleman in the room here with us. Explain about the safe stranger.
So it's I kind of touched on it a little bit with how I explained things earlier on, but it is about changing you as a parent. It's kind of taking off your parenting hat, stepping out of that role, and just trying to be that safety person to go through. And it is about changing that dialogue and allowing them to see you as more than just a parent, and having them realize that like, say for you, Troy, you're not just dad, you're also Troy, you're a person.
Yeah.
You're a lot more than that, and you can be another person for them in their life. And it does take time because, for years you've been, that disciplinarian, authoritarian, and it's like you show up as this different guy with a bit of different persona and different line of communication. And it's like, who are you? So it takes a while to get into that space too. But I think if you just remain consistent with changing the way you approach it, eventually they go, all right, like it is safe to open up here.
Yeah.
And they're always going to reference the first time you approach them about the topic of drugs. And if it was a negative experience, like, oh, you've caught me smoking a joint, now I'm in trouble, I'm grounded, it's just been terrible, they've ignored me and I feel like such a bad person, then that's their reference point for every other conversation moving forward.
Yeah, excellent. And so again, just going on that, at what point does something become an addiction? Because you guys do a lot more than just look at drug addiction. There's so many different addictions. What's that kind of definition of an addiction?
I would say, to keep it short, it's an inability to stop a habit despite its negative consequences.
Okay. And
So I mean, the minute that whatever you're engaging in, now just take your brains out of drugs and alcohol for a minute, okay? Let's take the hat off and let's think about all of the other things like working too much and sugar and gambling and pornography and online shopping and a plethora of other things. The minute that behavior starts affecting your personal or professional life, like even overworking, right? Going for that big salary and that big job or whatever it may be, but your family literally doesn't see you anymore. How is that any different than being a meth addict? Just saying, how is that any different? So the minute that whatever it is you're engaged in is a repetitive behavior over a period of time that starts taking away your lifestyle choices and the people around it that love you start explaining and complaining, that's at that point where you probably need to start having a look at what you're doing.
Well, so then it's highly likely that everybody on this Zoom call is addicted to something.
Look, as I have a theory, it'll be a TEDx talk one day. Every single human being on this planet is an addict. We are all addicts to one drug. Do you know what that is? It's called emotion. Every single one of us is addicted to emotions. We get addicted to an emotion from an event, from whatever happens, which turns into a behavior in a loop, which makes a pattern, which then makes you create stories falsely around God knows what, who, where, when, and how. And then some people get so stuck in those loops from the emotional addiction that the secondary vessel that they end up having to find a pressure release valve from is drugs, alcohol, pornography, and all of the other things. Every single one of us is an addict. It's just that some of us choose to do illegal sides of addiction. And so the legal users like to make themselves feel a little bit better by throwing stones in glass houses. Not everyone, but a lot of people, and stigmatize people doing illegal activities. But actually, all of us have vices, things we're guilty of, but mostly every single person at some point in their life has been guilty to being addicted to their emotions and letting that play out in a negative way, which is what we've all ended up going through in different parts of our life, learning from and growing from and probably becoming very successful because of it. But it's always been that every one of us is addicted to an emotion, and that loops to a point that some people can't keep up with the overwhelm.
So why do we get addicted?
So this is a question actually I had yesterday running some groups. It's, let's change the word addiction to coping strategy. Now we've got different IR in our head, different internal representation. It's a coping strategy that a lot of people go to, and for certain drugs, it sets the bar of euphoria and happiness like right up here outside of realistic. And it's kind of, highlighted and flagged as that's the best go-to in a time of feeling down, turmoil, again, looping through negative emotions, or life gets hard. It's like, that's our best coping strategy. The brain says, jump to that. That's your reference point.
And so multiple different coping strategies, addictions. So you've got addiction on one end. What's the opposite of addiction?
The opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Everybody in this world right now, in the last 3 years, experienced what it's like to live as an addict, because they were starved of connection. They were starved of even being able to go outside. And a lot of them would have started doing a lot more of something bad that they didn't normally do over that period of time, which is a coping strategy, because we had our freedom and freedom of movement taken away. So interesting. There's a man called Professor Bruce Alexander. And in the 70s, Professor Bruce Alexander undertook a study, right, where he wanted to prove that the opposite of addiction was connection. So what he did is the poor old rats always get this, they get tested all the time for everything. But what Professor Bruce Alexander did is he took 2 rats, and the first rat he put in a cage, and there was no other rats in this cage. There was no other tunnels. There's nothing to play with. It's just this rat on its own with 2 vials of water set up. One water vial has just water in it. The other water vial has cocaine or heroin as a release. He runs the experiment, and this rat, 9 times out of 10, during the experiment, keeps going to the stimulated, the drug-affected water to escape the fact he had no connection, and keeps drinking it till he dies. He then takes the second rat and puts it in a different cage, and this cage has all of the tunnels, all of the balls, all of the other rats to play with, have sex with, run around with, do whatever with the same 2 vials of water. Every time he ran the experiment, that rat would never go near enough and never went towards the water laced with heroin or cocaine, and only ever drank the normal water, proving that connection kills addiction. Now, you can say, well, that was done on rats. How can that mean the same for humans? Interestingly enough, a couple of years later, there was a human experiment run exactly the same as Rat Park, called the Vietnam War. In the Vietnam War, the American soldiers in it were in a horrible cage full of nasty things. They wanted to escape, and no connection to any sort of safety or human behavior. And so they all, I think about 78% of the whole army in the US were addicted to heroin, because they were in Vietnam, where the Golden Triangle of the best heroin in the world is. So they were using heroin the whole time in that war. And at the end of the Vietnam War, the whole of the American population thought that they were going to have a zombie apocalypse of heroin addicts land back in America after the war. Turned out, upon returning, out of that whole populace, nearly 90% of the soldiers within a matter of 3 to 6 months completely came off of the heroin addiction and went back to normal life, because they changed their cage and went back into a rat park. It's not our addiction that needs to change, it's our cage. That's why the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And so teenagers experimenting on drugs are probably because they feel a lack of connection, partly because of devices these days, secondarily because they haven't got a damn clue what's going on inside themselves with the hormones and all the stuff that's happening. Thirdly, for whatever reasons, you know, school, friends, lack of friends, bullying, can't fit in, too fat, too thin, don't look like this, can't look like that, constantly disconnected from themselves mainly. And to try and fit in somewhere, they'll just go along with the crowd.
So kind of thinking back again, you know, in this scenario, if connection is perhaps the first sign, a lack of connection might be the precursor to somebody starting to develop addictions to things which are going to have a negative impact. What can we do? Is it the same thing? We just have to build that trusted relationship with our kids? Should we be introducing them into sport? Should we be worrying about social media? What from your visibility, what can we do?
So I would say probably the two biggest things in our teen populace is a lot of peer influence, or for some teens it might be that their home influence. There might be drugs used in the home. Secondly, I would say it's mental health. You know, we've had such an increase in mental health diagnosis for teens and suicide attempts in teens, and it keeps getting higher and higher, these statistics. And there's it's readily available substances, so it's really hard to get our teens to avoid picking up a substance, and they've got mental health as a bit of a predisposition. You know, when you're not feeling great and someone can hand you a substance which changes your state, you're in an undesirable state, you don't want to feel that way, and someone gives you a ticket to feeling good for once, it's pretty hard not to get addicted.
Okay. And another thing that I've wondered about and can see some or foresee some challenges is these changing laws in vaping. And I know how prevalent vaping is for younger people. What do you think will happen when that becomes illegal? What do you think the behaviour will change? Do you think that's going to make a difference, or do you think it'll make it worse?
What happened in the 1920s when they made prohibition with alcohol? Did that stop it, did it?
No, but this is
made it more risky. Made it more risky. People were making moonshine, blowing themselves up sometimes, making alcohol, drove it underground, and it continued as normal. They can do what they want with vaping or anything else. You want the answer, just go and look at Portugal. Okay? Portugal have actually bothered to think forwardly, and they legalized everything. Go look at the stats. If you want to see how to fix this problem, look at the stats. So my question is, if it's a proven model and doing what Portugal did works, why is it that all of our governments don't want to do that?
Actually, breaking news, there is a big movement currently in South Australia to bring Portugal's model in. So yeah, that's really good news.
Okay. So is there anything in that space that we should be worried about if we're a parent of teenage kids? The vaping laws are going to come into effect. Anything that we should have on our radar?
I think there will always be another trend. You know, like before vaping, that pretend cannabis was a huge thing, and there was a few other herbs and spices being brought in shops. Teenagers were all over that. Then vaping became a big thing. Teenagers are all over that. I think, you know, a lot of it does come back to influence. You know, like vapes were kind of there initially to help people switch from cigarettes to an alternative to break that habit. And then it was sold in, you know, every second shop throughout, you know, the suburbs and the city. Kids start doing it. Someone thinks it's cool, and then everyone thinks it's cool.
The other important thing to discuss and talk about is the thing that we've practiced throughout our whole careers, and we continue to practice even in our business, although we're that good apparently that people don't need this practice anymore, and they seem to just want to stop addiction now in a matter of weeks with us, which is great. But in more clinical environments that we were in, we grew up through our industry with the harm minimization model. Now, maybe some would know that it is, maybe some wouldn't. Let me give you an example. I worked in a youth center, and just open-mindedly listen to this. Like, I'm not championing doing drugs, but people are going to do drugs anyway and decide when they're ready to stop. So how do we make sure it's safe for them? In a youth center, Aboriginal youth center I worked in the Northern Territory, the kids would come in every Friday night and they were stoned out of their trees. So they'd come in and I jokingly give them a bit of jest about the fact how high they were. And they go, no, we're not high, mister. I was like, yeah, let's just talk about it. Like, so what I would do was find out how they were smoking the weed, how much they were smoking. And then I'd give them alternatives. Instead of shutting them down, I'd say, okay, how's about you smoking your weed out of a bong involves water? I said, do you know what osmosis of the lungs is? Scare tactic without them knowing. Explaining using water to smoke weed called osmosis of the lungs and what it does to your lungs and the horrible outcome versus harm minimization. Why don't you smoke the weed out of a cone, a little pipe thing? Firstly, they don't need cigarettes to mix with, so they're not having two drugs to try and get off. Secondly, it's done purely just from the lighter and breathing it in, which means there's no water damage in the lungs. And then that opened the conversation the week or two later of then talking to them about how your brain is a muscle. And so if you were to go to the gym and work your physical muscles out, they would need time off each week to grow and rest. Your brain's the same, so why can't you just smoke weed as a treat Friday and Saturday nights when you know you don't have school those next 2 following days, and focus letting your brain muscle grow and work out over those days? The next week, my CEO tried to sack me. And the week after, she then re-employed me because all the parents had come in and said that everything I'd done with their kids had worked. They'd stopped smoking weed in the week and they were much better at school and everything. Harm minimization opens up a conversation, even if it's your own kids, of telling them how to do it safely and builds trust to the point that they can then understand with informed information what they should do. I stood in the classes and classes of kids over my life up in the Northern Territory, and I explained to them how meth was made and what it was made with. 9 out of 10 of those kids in nearly every class, jaw dropped to the floor when they realized what chemicals and things off of the shelves at Bunnings were being used to make meth. It wasn't such a sexy drug then. You can scare and overwhelm these kids with the right information that's true, that makes them think secondarily about what they're doing, because all their mates are doing is selling them this sexy idea and this marketable thing that everybody's doing, until you face them with the mortality that they're actually human beings, they're not robots, and the things they're doing can be done safer at least.
Which is, that in a short is well, that's a big answer to your question, but the short answer is just, informed decisions, educate your kids. You know, if they open up and say, I'm using, well, let's sit down in front of the computer together and learn about it. Or let's take you to someone so they can actually tell you what it is you're doing and make an informed decision.
And it's interesting, I know in school, both of our kids have gone through that the school education process around learning about drugs and having to explore drugs in a school assignment to discern what are the risks. And so they've been asked to do their own education around it. And still at the end of that, there's that sense of, oh yeah, I know that, but I'm going to do it anyway.
They're being asked to do that by teachers, professors, and whoever with no lived experience and no stories to share, just being told to their brain, it's like, oh, just another assignment, another class to take, another teacher on my back, another bit of homework my parents are going to be on me about. Their brain doesn't engage that assignment at all, because there's no one delivering the task by saying, by the way, let me tell you about what being a meth addict's like. Let me tell you what happens when you think you're tough on the streets and you start swinging a punch at someone, they stab you in the neck. X, Y, Z, ABC, you get the picture. Like their brain just hears another teacher banging on about another subject with another bit of homework. They don't care. But if the teacher was to be engaging and say, hey, actually, lads, you know, let's cut all the bullshit here and actually talk about the fact, well, when I was at 19, I actually used to smoke pot. And I got so high one night, like I actually ended up in hospital and nearly died, or whatever, you get the point. But if you don't engage them with a story, like, it's like everybody here at some point has been in a room where they've listened to a public speaker or watched a TEDx talk or whatever it is, yeah? Like if they just speak monotonally at you and just throw some things and say, go do that, you're not going to listen. But when someone engages you, changes the tonality, uses metaphors and talks in stories and does some comparisons and engages people. But I guarantee even if teachers were allowed to do that, they wouldn't be allowed to, would they? Because it's not okay and it's not PC.
Yeah. So is therefore a valuable strategy for parents to look for people who have had that lived experience, but how many of those are around to help in that scenario? I mean, I'm fortunate. I know you both.
It's a really great question because, like I said before about the peer stuff, there's quite a big movement across Australia with having peer workers and people who've experience in non-for-profits and that. And, you know, they can come and talk at schools for free, or you can take your children there for free, and you can get a peer to have a sit down and educate your children.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I mean, I'm glad there is. When I was coming up in the industry in 2014, I was told from day dot by the first person that started teaching me some education about this in the industry that I was to not share any of my story. And I said, kiss my ass, like I'm me, I'm a talk about my story. And I got absolutely vilified and destroyed by the industry. And even Jordan witnessed it in our own organization because I would share about my story then. And lived experience was not acceptable then. Now it's not only a movement, it's acceptable. And there's even plenty of online, I'm being serious, there is multiple online influencers that are actually good, who have the most horrific stories and have changed their lives around and use their daily content to actually educate these kids of what real gangsters used to do, what real drugs can do to you, and what real consequences look like. One of them's going to be actually coming in from Melbourne to come on our podcast show. Like he's got like 1 million followers or something. So there's actually some decent online presence there where you can get kids to look at and watch. You should check that influencer out, you know, and they can hear, because most of these kids, let's be honest, majority of these kids think they're gangsters. They are not. They are not equipped for what the streets do. But they like to think, because they've done a bit of weed and their mates and them listen to a bit of rap, that they're like, there's something. So when they hear, it's like a real powerful thing I seen a while back where they took these young, disenchanted American youths and they put them in an adult jail for like an hour and put them with real criminals. I don't know if you've ever seen that video. And these real criminals are allowed to literally threaten them and like make them realize they're not tough, they're kids. It's a similar process. If these kids can hear what real street life is versus the fact they think they can swing a punch, it's very powerful. But there is plenty of organizations. Jordan's is one of them. In fact, you are a bloody lived experience peer worker, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm the senior drug and alcohol peer with an organization in Adelaide.
Massive organization.
Yeah, so if anyone wants more information on that, I'm happy to send it through to you. Just send me a message.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I know you've put in the chat your email address if anybody wants to contact either of you to use that address too. And I think it's a fantastic resource. Now let's step away from kids for a minute because there are other people in relationships who have addictions and that may be drugs or it may be something else. What about partners? Is it a different approach if it's a partner to how you might explore addiction or drugs?
But that's probably one actually I'll give back to Danny because that's probably more something he might have experienced. I haven't really been in that experience myself.
So as in your partner is experiencing it?
Yeah.
So look, I don't think anybody is an inherently bad person or makes any sort of bad decisions unless they're in a very dark place. And so if your partner is starting to show signs of addictive behaviors, maybe it could be drinking, could be smoking weed too much, whatever. I think you have to be supportive, but you've got to face them head on and just say, listen, you know, I think you are drinking too much, and I'm here to help and support you. But I need to tell you that this is not just a casual thing. You're doing it a lot, and you need some support, and I'm here for you. I'm not vilifying you, but I'd love to know why. Like, why? What pain are you in? What are you trying to escape in reality? By using whatever it is you're using. I'm genuinely curious so that I know how to support you through this. I think if you can just approach it where don't sugarcoat it, tell them you know there's an issue, but how can you help?
Yeah.
Going about it and with all of the negative languaging and you know, you need to stop and this is bullshit. Stop. Someone doesn't choose addiction. I did not wake up one day and go, oh, I had a perfectly good life, had a great upbringing, I'm going to go mess my whole life up. It just doesn't work like that, right? You just get to a point where you haven't addressed certain things in your life and left it go for so long, for me, addicted to emotions and bullshit stories that never even existed, and then let it get so overwhelming that I started using XYZ on the ABC, and then it would just grow. The worst thing you can do is vilify and attack anybody that's stuck inside of an addictive pattern. You just tell them that you see them, you understand them, and most importantly, let's just say your partner started drinking heavily a year and a half ago, and you know the timeline because you're their partner, correct? So you would say to them after you've approached that, what is it that's happened 2 years, 2.5 years ago? If you can just look back 6, 12 to 18 months before they started that behavior and help them find that root cause of why they're in this pain and why they're crutching this, at that point, they'll get their own realization. And from there, you just support them.
Excellent. So let's take another lens and think about it. Maybe it's something in ourselves that we've realized we're addicted to. Is that it should be an easier path to, if it's ourselves, shouldn't it?
I think it definitely depends on your own self-awareness and ability to recognize that there's a problem first.
Yeah.
But yeah, it always starts with just that recognition. As soon as you recognize there's a problem, then the problem's not really a problem. You know, it's something to be tackled.
And how do we even think about that? You know, because this is one of the challenges, isn't it? You know, with Wellteam, we get people to explore going off coffee for a week, and people realize that in fact they've been addicted to coffee. People can be consuming social media all the time, and it's a fun, happy endeavor. How do we realize it? I mean, you said that inability to stop a behavior that's negative is the definition of an addiction. Are there any checks we can do?
I'd probably say, you know, do some reflective practice. You know, there's lots of little exercises you can do, or you can ask for. You know, a great one of mine is kind of doing a self-audit and just going like, you know, what kind of things am I doing throughout my life? Is what I'm doing aligned with my values? Is what I'm doing affecting any of my values? You know, like you might have an importance on family and friends and finances, but then you might find that actually, you know, I'm a bit poor in this value because I'm spending a lot of money on alcohol. I didn't realize I had a bit of an alcohol problem until now.
Yeah, good. Now, I'm going to open up now to any questions from our listeners out there in the great wide world. Does anybody have any questions? You can either put them through on the chat or you can turn yourself off mute and ask them now. Oh,
I'll make a start. So thanks for putting this on. and I just want to say up front, I've actually never taken an illicit drug in my life, which seems to be fairly rare in the areas that I work in. A lot of what you said resonated, and I remember over 50 years ago being in school, and they set up this machine that smoked cigarettes, and then it went through a sponge, and in the end they squeezed this sponge, and all the nicotine came out, and it had a really, what Danny was talking about, it had an effect that, wow, why would you put that gunk in your lungs and all that sort of stuff? And I guess another comment, we've got a crime wave in Sydney. There was a gangster was killed a couple of days ago. It's all around drugs. And I think just legalizing is, I haven't studied the Portugal model, whatever, but to me, a good step forward would be legalizing this, putting some controls in place, but get rid of all the crime out of this stuff. And I'm guessing the crime actually adds to the number of people who have addictions. The other thing I struggled, Danny made a point about defining addiction, and I've got a hierarchy of addictions, I guess, based on the negative impact. So I would guess that having an ice addiction has far more impact on me than my work addiction, which I've got. So I know they're all addicts, but I'm going to put these in some sort of sequence. Is that okay?
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think the severity of an addiction is very different. Like if you're looking at crystal meth versus a workaholic, the impacts with crystal meth are going to be greater overall in terms of health, relationships, finances. Like there's a lot more going on because of that substance versus a workaholic. He might be just neglecting his marriage, but bringing in a lot of money and really enjoying his time at work.
Yeah. And I'd argue even some addictions are good. If I've got an addiction that I go for a 5-kilometer walk every day or something like that, and it's good for me. So I just want to, it's not necessarily bad that I have to do this thing because it's actually good for me.
Yeah, I would say there's no such thing as a healthy addiction. There's healthy habits. Addiction.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting with Wellteam when we've been looking at building an app. But my pushback for that is that I actually don't want something that people are addicted to. I want them to be able to have not something that's going to be harassing them all the time in order to log their behaviors and log their healthy habits, but to make the choice to go in to use it rather than it be something that just is constantly in your face. Any other questions?
I'll ask a question, Troy, if that's all right.
Yeah, go Ron.
Danny, Jordan, thank you. It's been really good to be a part of this and to hear and engage in your wisdom. One of the look, you both know my work environment. You know that I work in child protection, and one of the observations for me that is really troubling in terms of certain types of addiction is the ambivalence to risk that can be associated with either the addiction itself or the quest to access drugs. And I'm wondering if you would be able to talk a little bit about managing beyond the addiction and working alongside of, considering that the mentoring model you were talking about before or other models, the way that we can not just understand and be alongside of a young person, but how we can in some way or other be able to support them to be protective of themselves.
So having the children be a bit more protective of themselves.
So I'll give you an example, Jordan. It's not uncommon where young people who are where I work are prostituting or other various really high risk behaviours as a means to continue to access drugs, which are the reality of their addiction. And that's probably a fairly extreme example, but there are other, even going out late at night to places you don't know to score drugs can be a really high risk activity that is based very much in ambivalence for self self-preservation in the appetite to get access to those drugs. And so I guess I'm talking about not specifically the impact of the addiction, but the impact of some of the behaviours that are associated with the addiction.
Yeah, okay, that's well, that example you give me, that's kind of a grey area for me. That's not really something I've ever had to work through with anyone. So I'm not quite sure on what I'd give for an answer. I'll probably have to think about that one and come back to you.
Yeah, I would. I'm experiencing this a little bit lately with the young fella that I've been working alongside, who has these similar things. I think just being able to have the right supports professionally with them that have their own lived experience, so that they can build that trust to explain and open a conversation and dialogue as if they are grown-ups, to be able to discuss that risk, can be helpful. That's I guess in the professional space, which we both kind of work in our own ways. It's difficult because there's some really good people out there that these young people can go to that are professionals, both in social work, psychology, and counseling. But having them to have supports from people with lived experience that can then explain, well, this is actually what's going to happen to you because it happened to me, and giving them the informed decision from the horse's mouth versus from someone they may look at and go, I trust you, but you're a white coat. Like, to me, I trust you. You tell me the truth. Everything you say, I believe, but I just don't think you get what it's like on these streets, if that makes sense. I feel like finding some connections on top of the care package they have with people that have been there on the worst level and tell them, you ready for that? Because this is what I've been doing with this young fella, and I kind of scare him out of where he thinks he's headed, to the point where I kind of confront him and I challenge him, and I say, you're doing this and you're not aligned with it, because the minute someone comes knocking on the door, I've got to go deal with them. You're not what you think you are, yet you engage in risky mouthing off behind a screen, and then when it comes to the face-to-face, you've got to send me out there. It's just an example, but to be able to collate and find decent lived experience people to bring into, say, DCP and many other organizations to get involved with these young kids. Like these young kids in Alice Springs, I took on this man who was a sergeant of arms for the rebels many years ago. Jordan worked with him too. He's now come out and runs a boxing program, which is his dream anyway. And with all the tattoos and the war stories and the stuff, and plus being a boxing coach for these young kids, he gives it to them straight and tells them where they think they're so tough and they're like Bloods and Crips on the street, whatever. And then he tells them about what gang life is, and it massively gets through to them real quick. Kids will make an informed decision with the right information, but it's the information giver that may be the pivotal moment to get rid of that ambivalence.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, isn't it? I know when I've spoken to my own kids about risk, they look at me and think, here's a guy that runs a well-being company and he's telling me about risk. What would he know? And it's very difficult in that space to have any credibility, to say you shouldn't be at the streets late at night because people get mugged. Well, I've been at the streets late at night and I didn't get mugged.
Yeah.
So there's no risk because it hasn't. I get this pushback all the time. I was out late at night walking the streets and I was safe. So therefore there's no risk because I've done it once and I didn't die. But having people who've got lived experience who can convey the actual reality behind it, I think that's so important to try and get through to kids.
And I think it's just based around giving them real education through real lived eyes in the school systems, in the youth systems, and in our community systems. Yeah. They need people put in front of them that do not wrap things up in cotton wool, that are controversial, and that get in their faces and tell them what the realities of this is, and get into them about the fact that, yeah, good on you. So You tried cocaine once and you didn't die. Yeah, no worries. I did that too. You want to know where I ended up after that?
Yeah. And maybe because we segregate people in society so much these days that we really, you know, I joke that, you know, we've got the Burnside gangsters, you know, who walk around thinking they're gangsters but live in these amazing houses in the eastern suburbs of Adelaide, and yet the reality of that experience is much different, but yet the belief is probably the same. You know, I'm tough because I go out late at night. Yeah. Different level of toughness and different level of reality.
Yeah.
Now, I'm conscious that we are at 8 o'clock, and I'm really happy to keep going with this conversation and take more questions. But if you have to leave now, please feel free to do so. If you're keen to keep the conversation going a bit longer, Danny and Jordan, you happy to stick around for a bit longer?
Yeah. If anyone wants to talk about anything anymore, it's no problem.
Yeah, beautiful. So if you do have to leave, thank you so much for being here. And if you don't have to leave, stick about. We'll get the juicy stuff now. This is the sealed section, is it? Should I stop the recording now?
Yeah, stop the recording.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? And then I will stop the recording. So if anybody does have anything they want to ask, that we can do that.
Night, Mum.
Thanks, Christine.
I'd like to just sort of make a comment, Troy and guys, if I can. So you guys talked about, you know, where schools have become very politically correct. And I wonder how we change that dialogue. And I remember grade 4, Nicholson Avenue Primary School in Whyalla. My teacher, his name was Mr. Botroff. He lit up his cigarette in class. And he showed us the cigarette had a filter. And he took a drag, and then he held the cigarette smoke in his mouth, and then he blew it out into a tissue. And you can imagine how brown the tissue was. He then took another drag and inhaled it back into his lungs, and then exhaled into a tissue, and the tissue was obviously a much lighter shade of brown. And his whole illustration to us was, where do you reckon all that's gone? That sits with me like it was yesterday, and that was 43 years ago. And you know, you guys touched on it before around this whole thing around how schools are just, even as a society, we are way too politically correct. We are happy to have conversations like this in private, but you know, and you guys said earlier, you know, we do drug and alcohol education in schools by people who haven't lived with the problems of them. So how do we change that? Because, you know, as I said, that memory, and I could show you the classroom. I mean, that's how clear that memory was. You know, and I'm one of these people who hasn't ever had any illicit drugs ever, because I've never understood the point of them. It's never been a curiosity. I remember, you know, when I was 16, 17, going to parties and watching my mates smoke, you know, marijuana and whatever, and it just never appealed to me. But I think memories like that are so real. I don't know how we change that dialogue and stop putting PowerPoint presentations up and talking about what could happen, rather than to what the point you guys made was, here's what actually happened. So how do we change that?
That is an excellent question, and I've got absolutely no idea. I would say go to your local, talk to them about it. Or honestly, I think, you know, if you can't get something done in the school system or in the public service, you know, have that education at home. You know, do those things at home. Make it an experience you can both go through. You know, it's something to explore together, and it's something they'll remember and go, oh yeah, it's cool. Like, my dad's talking to me about drugs. Like, this is weird, and we're both going to learn something.
Also, 2 things. Firstly, I'll send Troy a file of a video which is a bloke who goes into a school and shares his experience, public speaking wise, which you could just have as a resource anyway for your kids.
Yeah.
But secondarily, that bloke went into that school sharing what he learned, which tells me that every country, every state, and every city will have public speakers that do that. And if you've got these schools with all of the money, and I know they've got all the money, then I think it then falls on what is it called? PTAs? What is it called? Parent teacher thing, whatever. Like, I think it just falls on
Parents.
I think it just falls on the parents to try and come together and just say, look, this education that you're giving with the drug and alcohol stuff doesn't work. Because they'll love this, you go find these few different people that could come in and you go, there is a list of people that do this for a living and speak about their experience in school. It costs that, and our kids are worth more than that, and you should know that, and most of people have to pay fees to these schools. So there's a list. As a group of parents, we implore you to figure one of them out and bring them in. We've done the work for you. All you got to do is book them.
And you know what's about that, Danny, is that schools do that with driver education. They bring in people who have caused car accidents or parents who have lost kids. They do that. So isn't it interesting that they have a habit of doing that with driver education, but not with drug and alcohol?
Because it's not sexy, or not sexy, but like it's taboo in a way, but it's not. But I just think to myself, like, why not actually look at and I mean, Jesus, you could even, do a global directory of these kind of people in the different cities around the country and the world, and it could become a resource where, look, at the end of the day, right? Parents don't think they run these schools, but if they want to, they can run these schools. Because without the kids and the parents, these schools can't do nothing. And they can sit there in their little frat behaviors and all of their rubbish in their little high towers, these principals and people, all right? But guess what? Without the kids and the parents, the schools don't exist. So the parents have a lot more power. Very, very educated people, all of you are. There's ways that you could easily just pull the resources and go and confront the right people at that school and say, this is the list, you're going to figure something out and you're going to bring this in, and you can do it to the whole lot of them. You don't even have to bring this lad into one classroom. The whole lot of them in an assembly, get one of these speakers in to talk about their lived experience. And these speakers, this is literally what they do for their whole living. They're good at it. They're trained at it. They have a story. It's elicited. It's structured like a TEDx talk. It will hit to the heart. And this particular one that I'll send Troy to share with anyone on here and the Wellteam group chat. You remember the one with the American wrestler? Wow, it films all of the kids crying their eyes out, like holding each other, from the harrowing story about his addiction and how I'm not going to spoil it. It's an amazing video. And it's literally called "Every Kid Should Watch This." So if that bloke exists and got pulled into that school, I know damn well there's people that make careers, professions out of this all over the country, and definitely in this state. And if you can't find anyone, someone can pay me and I'll go do it. Because I used to do it all the way up in Alice Springs and the Northern Territory. No one used to pay me for that. And I loved it. I'll do it for free. I don't really care, because what I've been through has been given to me as a gift, and I need to use that and share it with the world and help people help people. So either way, seeing as I think everyone left on the line now is just in Adelaide, we'll sort this out for ourselves and our kids in Adelaide through these different things we've talked about today. Anyone outside of that can do the exact same if they really want to in their city.
So let me loop back and just try and do a summary of tonight. So if you've got kids and your kids are starting that experience in drugs, Sarah, first thing is to try to get the conversation open. So don't shut down, don't do the ashamed thing, and I'm guilty of that. But to really start to open up that conversation and try to learn from their experience.
And and
try to understand
about you. Don't make it about you either. Don't make it about what we've done wrong as parents. Where did we go wrong? What could we have done better? No, none of it. Cut it out.
Yep. And to think about it as a partnership arrangement rather than a me versus them, and to try to change the nature of that relationship from parenting to peer almost, or something around that. In reinterpreting the whole addiction as a coping strategy. So thinking about it in that way rather than in a negative context, and therefore trying to understand that the person is experiencing something through which they need to find a coping strategy.
Yeah. And
sort of try to focus in on that, what's behind, what's causing the need for the coping strategy.
So a great statement to use, whether it's your partner, your parent, your family member, your kid, your employee, your friend, your work colleague. Simple. Just say to them, not why the addiction, but why the pain. Tell me why you're in this pain. Where is it coming from? That's all you need to ask them. Just not why the addiction, why the pain.
Excellent. And so if we do find ourselves in that situation, it's really valuable to look for people who have some lived experience, who have that credibility, who can provide that assistance, in particular for kids. And it's a great place, and a couple of guys that I know that can be really helpful in South Australia. I think Inside Out Coaching and Consultancy, if you move yourselves aside, we can see the backdrop better. And
get out of the way.
Perfect. And also to think about a self-audit as well. I think that's a really helpful thing to think about in terms of our own behaviours and whether we are doing things that are addictive or are they healthy habits. I think that's a really valuable thing. And, you know, am I doing something that's affecting my values? I think that's a really nice way to think about it as well.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good summary, I think.
And I think, you know, good on Ian for making that point. There is things that are good to do a lot of, but as Jordan summarized, what did you say?
Yeah, there's no such thing as a healthy addiction. There's healthy habits, but as soon as we label it an addiction, it implies that it's negative and we're unable to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think...
Don't forget the opposite of addiction, being connectedness.
Yeah, connection.
I thought that was really powerful, because I like it, because it turns the conversation around from what's wrong with you to what is wrong with the situation, or how did we get as a society, and particularly for you in an environment where you're feeling pain and you're feeling unconnected. Yep. I think that's really turns it from a stigma conversation to a, you know, how do we work together, and how to, not only in this situation but as a society as well. So I thought that was very
Professor Bruce Alexander, look him up. He did some amazing work with all these studies. I based most of my knowledge on when I first seen that 8 years ago. It changed my life. I can literally reel off that video word for word almost to this point. Like, it's just amazing. And the way that it's been proved with humans as well means you don't have to go, oh yeah, but they were rats. It's like, well, no, Vietnam War, same.
Yeah. And also it gets a little bit deeper with people too, because you can have a disconnect from, you know, things externally, but a big one I see is an internal disconnection. It's really hard for someone to sit in sobriety with themselves. You know, it's an unwanted, undesirable state. So there's that internal disconnect. It's like, I don't want to be with me. I need to shut it off.
Yeah.
It just makes so much sense. It's such a powerful way to think about it. It's really good.
Brilliant. And Richard, as Wellteam's Fox for the month, would you say you've become a little bit addicted to trying to outdo everybody else in exercise this month?
I reckon I've developed a healthy habit, mate.
There we go.
Absolutely, Troy. That's an excellent statement.
You might just want to have a little think about that one, Richard.
Yeah, well, mate, just in all seriousness, Wellteam and this conversation, I think, and this talk has backed it up, is that the goal that I have in the back of my mind is sustainable, right? Do things that are sustainable. Can I do this again next month? Because I reckon I can, right? But I didn't want to do something ridiculous that I could never do again, because I don't think that's sustainable. So if you're going to make a change, or if you're going to do something, small steps, make it sustainable. So whilst I sort of did stretch myself, I didn't think I was trying to do something that's unsustainable.
Yeah, beautiful.
And I've seen the price in Hocker go up already, Richard, so you'll be fine.
Yeah, yeah, the shares are going up.
Any other questions of the guys while we might wrap it up then?
Guys, thank you. That was really good.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Our pleasure. Glad you got something out of it. And like I said, there's really nothing stopping you putting your heads together in your different schools with parents that care and are involved, to presenting a few of these people that must be here in Adelaide to your school and go get them in front of the kids and do your job.
That's a great idea.
We can make it happen.
Yep. Well done. Thank you.
So once again, just to wrap it up, thank you all for being here. Yvonne, thanks for coming in from the other side of the world. That's been absolutely fantastic having you here. Have you enjoyed your time in Adelaide? Maybe not. She might be on another call. But thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Danny. I really appreciate you. Appreciate you both sharing, and for being a personal support for me as well in the stuff that I've experienced, and continue to support those people. And I can't think of two other people who are more passionate about really making a difference in this world than the two of you. And obviously, we're right behind the success of your business, inside out coaching and consultancy, and everything you do in trying to help people deal with what are some of the more challenging things in life. And also this concept of thugs need hugs, and really thinking about the people who perhaps need help the most are the ones that we see as being the least needy of help. And so I think that's really affected my thinking over time, is to go, we need to lean into this as a challenge for society, not distance ourselves from the problem, but actually get in and try and understand it.
Yeah, but just think about it as a closing thought, right? Young men that get into gangs are probably from homes where they're disconnected and not loved and don't know where they fit. And so then they find this family who indoctrinate them in to become a part of something, bringing them connection. And then from that point on, that's what they think is their norm and their social stick of understanding.
Yeah.
And I would challenge everyone as we leave this today to think about people in your own lives, in your families, your employees or your work colleagues, or even friends you don't talk to now, and think about the challenging behaviors that they've done. And remember that the people that need love the most probably deserve it the least. And I challenge everyone on here today to think of one person that they haven't spoke to for a while because of their negative behavior at the time when they needed the love the most.
Yeah, beautiful. Jordan, any closing words?
Just thank you to Troy and Jordan and Daniel. I've really enjoyed it. Been sitting here just taking it all in. It's been fantastic. So thank you. And I am in Adelaide. It was 50 odd years ago I landed in Australia. So, saying I was English, but yeah.
Sorry, Yvonne, I got that wrong, didn't I?
No, that's all right. That's all right. So I'm happy about that. But yeah, hate cities. I really do. Much prefer countryside.
Good on you. Jordan, any closing words?
I just hope that everything we've discussed tonight has helped each and every one of you in some different way. I don't know if anyone's got a personal situation where this might be applicable, or one might come up, and hopefully this can all be applied there. But I'd rather everyone have a bit more education and not enough.
Yeah, beautiful. Now you've got a podcast too, so people should be checking out the podcast. How do they find that?
Just on YouTube, Inside Outers, but spelt with Inside Out RZ in one word. We've just put a new episode up today. Most of you on here are in the white collar world of corporate. I suggest you go watch Rowan's episode. She's a very brave young woman who has started one of the leading startup tech companies in Adelaide and probably going to be a unicorn within the decade, rivaling Uber and doing much better than what Uber does in ethics. Amazing episode about a woman born into poverty and violence who used her adversity to create magic in Cobber. So if you don't watch any other episode, I know everybody on here in the corporate world would enjoy this episode, so go watch it. It's on there now.
Yeah, beautiful. Excellent. Thank you all. Really appreciate your time. And
thanks everyone. Great stuff.
Change the world.
Stay shiny.
See you, boys.
Bye-bye.